Good, good, good morning. This is part three of the contract for Black America. The final part is addendum, the case for Neo-Reconstruction. The contract of Black America is, of course, the document that was supported by Ice Cube and created with a number of black intellectuals and leading members of the community. We are proposing a black agenda, a neo-reconstruction that would empower African Americans economically and educationally, as well as provide justice and equal protection under the law. The case for neo-reconstruction, at the end of Reconstruction, the Republican Party took on the lead on attempting to fairly and justly integrate African Americans into American life. It was done through a government led effort called Reconstruction, a period that lasted roughly from the passing of the Reconstruction Act of 1867 to the Compromise of 1877. During that decade of Reconstruction, African Americans were re-enfranchised or enfranchised, legally given voting and civil rights, the 14th and 15th Amendments. Nearly 2,000 African Americans were elected to public office, and the black representation in even the state of South Carolina, one of the bastions of the Confederacy, where the Civil War actually started, at Fort Sumter, was a verbose 59%. In 1876, the Democratic Republican presidential candidate Rutherford B. Hayes reached a compromise with the Democratic Party and James Tilden, who was a Democratic representative, that ceded control of the South to the Democrats, ending the Reconstruction and eventually leading to the institution of a Jim Crow era that placed African Americans in a form of de facto slavery for approximately the next 100 years. Had Reconstruction continued, the African American condition and race relations in America would be far beyond what they are today. Recognizing this unfortunately lost opportunity, we, members of the Coalition for the Contract of Black America, propose a neo-reconstruction, an aggressive initiative that has the purpose of redressing past rights and wrongs, or past wrongs, and creating rights and revitalizing the black community economically, educationally, judicially, and in every other way necessary to ensure that African Americans have a full and equal opportunity and status within our country. The two key areas to address are economics and education. In this addendum, first up, economics. The economic impact through institutional and racist reinforcement of laws and policies such as the Homestead Act of 1862, the Social Security Act of 1935, the GI Bill of 1944, and the Federal Housing Administration loan and its related redlining of the 1930s through the 1960s. White Americans were granted advantages and opportunities that African Americans were not. All but 2% of the $120 billion of government-backed mortgage loans that were awarded was given to whites. This reality undeniably created an incredible wealth gap between black and whites today. According to the Federal Reserve, the median white household is worth $171,000. It has nearly 10 times more wealth than the median black household of $17,600. A white person without a high school diploma has nearly as much wealth as a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or advanced degree. A household led by a white person with a high school diploma has more wealth than a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or an advanced degree. Let's understand that again. A household led by a white person with a simple high school diploma has more wealth than a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or advanced degree. Hispanics have an overall household wealth of $20,700. Blacks 17.6 thousand. Whites $171,000. The lingering cost of a race-based policy, according to the real estate app Redfin, African American families have lost out on at least $212,000 in personal wealth over the past 40 years because their homes were redlined. Because of these historic wrongs, masses of African Americans need economic revitalization and relief, including those not limited to more home ownership, less debt, better credit, and higher incomes. A noted Bible saying goes as follows: any man or woman who wrongs another in any way that is so unfaithful to the Lord is guilty and must confess the sins they have committed. They must make full restitution for the wrongs they have done, add a fifth of the value to it, and give it all to the person they have wronged. Numbers 5:6. Uh, who should receive the restitution? Our goal is to propose an economic strategy and processes to address the concerns of 40 million living descendants of American slavery. As a group that range 3.3 to 5 generations away from the legalized economic atrocity and are current victims of post-civil rights discrimination such as racial policing and increased cost of court and legal fees, credit discrimination and higher cost of interest, housing market discrimination and depressed home values, job discrimination and persistent wage gaps, mass incarceration and loss of wages, subprime mortgage collapse and race-based exploitation, student debt disparities that are impacted by race. What are the economic targets? To use a measurable and fair calculation similar to those suggested above to address the economic implications of the above structure and to lead the country to a better and more inclusive economic infrastructure, calculations, metrics, the compensation for lost wages. Economist Larry Neal calculated the difference between average wage paid to non-black laborers and the expenditures for expenses paid for slaves such as clothing and housing. This calculated to $1.4 trillion in 1983, now estimated between 5 to 8 trillion with a 5% assumed interest. Compensation for the market value of slavery. Confederate Senator Judah Benjamin estimated the market value of slaves to be $40 billion in 1860, compounded to 2019, that would equate to 9.3 trillion with 5% assumed interest. And you got to remember that not a slave was paid any reparations. As a matter of fact, a month or so before the end of the Civil War, Lincoln met with Alexander Stephens and offered the slave holders reparations if they would simply end the war. The Freeman's Bank and the Seneca Stone Ring scandal. Payment to the descendants of the depositors of the Freeman's Bank due to the fact that the bank lender and noted Republican politician Henry Cook used the former slaves' funds during their financial collapse, and the federal government didn't insure or support it. The net present value of the NPV to account for interest of the capital was approximately $65 million in 2018 dollars. Job discrimination calculation. Between a 40-year period of 1929 through 1969, if you just account for 40% of the pay gap due to race, labor market discrimination gains accrued to whites was about $1.6 trillion. Consideration for disbursement. Recognizing the gross domestic product of the overall United States is 20.5 trillion, we are simply not suggesting that the above amounts be dispersed as a one-time lump sum payment, which could adversely affect the American economy and treasury functions, not to mention cause staggering inflation. Instead, the above calculated amounts which could be dispersed or distributed in several forms, including annual cash installments over a 10-year period, tax breaks, tax credits, interest-free loans to spur home ownership, and or funding the additional proposals made below. Recommended tactics for retribution: mandate that descendants of African American veterans of World War II who were unable to capitalize on the opportunities afforded by the GI Bill of 1944 through 1956 should receive the NPV of those benefits today, calculated at a 5% interest rate. Start trust funds for asset building grants for home ownership, education, business startup funds, or vouchers for purchase of financial assets, along with a governing body to establish rules and protections for proper allocation of capital for long-term development. Mandate that all American corporations that benefited financially from slavery start management trainee programs for African American graduates, with the goal being to increase the number of blacks in management executive positions to one of equality with the black population, 13%, given a number of years, and donate a federally mandated percentage of their profits to black-owned businesses over a predetermined period of time. Launch a user-friendly national website and app to support in rolling out this plan, along with networking, training, and educational components. Create a pension system for purposes of investment and growth where only interest payments are currently accessible. A variation of this was earlier suggested by Callie House and the 1898 Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. Make a significant capital investment in financial infrastructure, as currently 70% of African American communities don't even have a branch or bank of any kind and are subject to predatory lending. Develop a commission in a timeline in which commission will address particular economic infractions over time to bring closure to on a case-by-case basis. Create and support endowments for HBCUs, which still educate the majority of black doctors and engineers. Create a transparent reporting mechanism for abuses to the restitution program to ensure systems remain efficient and effective, including federal programs such as economic opportunity zones and community reinvestment acts. Mandate private equity, pension funds, mutual funds, and venture capital firms to divest from privatized prisons and be accountable for increasing black venture capital allocation from their current 1% to one closer to equality with black populations, 13%, within a given number of years. Mandate that corporations increase the number of blacks in management executive positions to one closer to the equality of black populations within a given number of years. Mandate corporations through tax incentives or laws to spend a percentage of their profits with black-owned businesses over a predetermined period of time. For example, if a tech and banking sector were to spend just 2% of their net profits for the next 10 years, that would equate to $25 billion and $19.4 billion respectively. That comes from Forbes magazine, the 2% solution inside billionaire Robert Smith's bold plan, June 19, 2020. The implementation timeline, the committee formation in 2020, data gathering in 2021, and beginning phase one payments 2022. The next point is education in the Neo-Reconstruction plan. Many hearts are being called today to a new level of commitment in a fight against racial injustice